There is Zoom.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining today's DATAVERSITY webinar, The Importance of Ethics in Data Governance. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you can find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link of the recording of the session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an acknowledged data management authority and associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 35 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 30 countries, including some of the world's most important. Among his 13 books are many firsts, starting before Google, before data was big, and before data science. Peter has founded several organizations that helped more than 200 organizations leverage data-specific savings, which have been measured at more than 1.5 billion US dollars. His latest is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Peter, hello and welcome.
And hello and welcome to everybody. And Shannon, it was so good to see you out in California last week at our big conference. Sorry for those of you that missed it, but boy, did we have a exciting program. I want to start off today by acknowledging some contributions that my friend Karen Lopez helped co-develop some of this material with me. We've done this at conferences a couple times at events that Shannon runs and things. But our topic today, of course, is the importance of ethics in data governance. And just for starting off pieces here, 80% of the problems measured over the last 10 years in data, in organizations trying to do something better with data, in trying to improve their data operations, et cetera, et cetera. 80% of those are people and process problems. And as such, data governance is the only thing that you have in your organization that is focused on addressing the people and process problems. And because they are people and process related, ethics plays a huge role in them. So with that, let's take a look at our overview today. What we're going to do is look at some ethical lenses. There are 6 ethical lenses that we look at governance and ethics in general with on this. We'll go through those. Then we'll look at why governance has a specific focus on ethics. And it's just the kind of thing that you simply cannot enjoy. We'll look at some frameworks for ethical decision making, and then a roadmap for data ethics, which I think is a really good way to sort of follow the right path for those of you that are just getting started on this. I'll give you a couple of examples of this, and then we'll sum up and come up with some Q&A at the end of this, about an hour from now. So sit back, as Shannon says, get comfortable, and either that or hopefully you're out walking the dog or whatever else it is that you do during these things. Let's dive in with these ethical lenses. And many times when you're looking at data pieces and ethics in particular, it seems as if there is no correct path that you can go through. And part of the reason for that is because we talk oftentimes about so many of the challenges that are there. But the idea isn't that there's a bunch of blocks and that you can't do this and that you can't do that, but instead that there are ways of working through this. And again, your data governance group, it's really the only area in the organization that's going to focus on this. And I said at the beginning, it's the 80% of the problems that people encounter with. We've just measured this over time. It's very good research that shows that this is the case. But of course, now we're in the area of AI. And with AI, it's even more important, because if you're doing things with data, there's a tendency to cut corners, because the venture capitalists of the world have promised the world, and their shareholders in particular, that they're going to achieve $2 or $3 trillion more value out of AI. And that pushes people like yourselves to have to be the delivery arm of that promise. And it's not easy, and the temptation is oftentimes to cut corners, to try to do things unethically. So let's start off with a definition of ethics, which refers to standards and practices, and saying how we ought to act in situations that we find ourselves as human beings. So ethics gives us also the idea of one's character. If you have an unethical person or somebody who's been labeled an unethical person, you will find they have a more difficult time finding collaboration opportunities in there. But you can't just do it based on your own set of skills. You have to build knowledge, skills, and habits in order to do this. Ethics is, in fact, so ingrained in people that Buzz Aldrin, if you remember his name from the space travel, filled out a travel voucher to go to the moon. And I've blown up the little part here you see in red. He leaves from Houston, Texas. He's going to be going based on government air, which includes a spaceship. So he's going to go to from Cape Kennedy to the moon, to the Pacific Ocean, to Hawaii, and then back to Houston, Texas. So this is his round trip journey in order to do this. And he filled out his government travel vouchers. Those of us in the government have to fill out our travel vouchers. And it said government meals and quarters. Transportation is going to be furnished in all cases, but he still had to fill out the travel voucher. And they might think, wow, I'm going to the moon. I don't really need to tell people this, do I? But once again, it's just one example of many, many people throughout the world who do this kind of thing as a second nature. So I mentioned there are 6 ethical lenses. This is not necessarily a class per se in ethics in the sense, but it is important to understand that these are well-developed perspectives that you can take on ethics. None of them is 100% correct for your situation. In fact, as data governance professionals, your role is primarily to figure out which of these are suitable to apply to the problems that you have in hand, and perhaps, if you get lucky, to the organization as a whole. The first lens is the rights lens. This is the one that protects and respects the moral rights of all of those who are involved. And for each of these lenses, I've included in here a live link that you can click on and go take a look at some very good, more detailed information on this. But this would be folks that have, we might talk about First Amendment rights of free speech and things like that. That could be one application of rights lenses on this. The second one is the utilitarian lens. How will the action that I'm proposing to take impact everybody who is affected by it? These are the consequences of the actions that we take as human beings. And when we talk about this from the impact on this, we're really talking about it in the future. It's not the kind of thing that you should look at with retrospect, because of course then the consequences can and oftentimes are quite obvious and oftentimes unexpected as well. So this is a forward thinking process of looking at these 6 lenses. Justice. So it's the idea that every person should be given their due. And again, an eye for an eye might be one way of looking at something for a justice lens. Of course, if you do this from an eye for an eye perspective, you'll end up with fewer people with eyes. And that may not actually be the benefit of society all the way around. There's a virtue lens, the idea that virtues provide for the development of humanity, and that everybody who is virtuous should oftentimes also be ethical as well. That's 4 so far. Let's go to the 5th one, common good. The idea that there is a common good. Life in the community is a good, and all of these things should contribute to our own perspectives in this area. So looking at it perhaps from a neighborhood or a state or city-wide perspective, or a company-wide, organization-wide perspective on this. And the last one is the care, which is the idea that we need to have ethical care rooted in relationships and respond to individuals rather just following rules or calculating utilities. Now, as I said before, these are 6 perspectives that you should consider as you're looking at things, because an important aspect of this is that most organizations do not provide you any guidance in this area. And when you have no guidance, you're going to make yourselves up one. Well, we don't want you to do it out of whole cloth. Look at these as the starting place for understanding all of these, because these ethical lenses then relate to how society does things. And again, they are sort of dimensions of the information age. You have information or data rights and obligations. Again, the idea that you should be able to get your news from an unadulterated source, or that your information that you're looking at when you're participating in a ritual that we call voting in society, that you've gotten good information on that, or that you're dealing with somebody in a position of authority and they are not lying to you. These are uh, those type of aspects. There are property rights. Again, as a property owner, you have certain rights and responsibilities, whether it's the ownership of an item that you have in your possession, or whether it's an actual physical piece of property that you have. You will have, again, certain the ability to defend your castle is what they call it. I don't live in a castle, but you get the idea what's in there. This a dimension of accountability and control. And if things I'm doing in my castle, my house, my abode, my part of society are harmful to others, then that really does make me accountable. For example, I live on a 20-acre horse farm in rural Virginia. Those of you that know this, it's a wonderful place to live. But if my horses wandered about the neighborhood and ate other people's vegetable gardens and made messes in their yard, that would not be a very accountable situation here. So, of course, I have a fence around my pasture here in order to take care of it. We talk about system quality, and we're really talking system in the largest sense here. So the picture that's illustrated is a system of building some type of a dwelling or building in society here. So it's not the actual technical system, although those are important as well, but it's really how the system functions as a general rule. For example, just a quick note, if you've ever been driving a car in the city of Cairo, Egypt, their system of giving tickets there is that if you do something bad, the policeman writes down your license plate number on a pad of paper, and then they turn them in at the end of their shift. And at next time you go to get your license renewed, they will also hand you a bill for all of the traffic violations that you have accumulated in there. You can see how that might not be the highest quality system for enforcing traffic fines, but everybody just kind of sighs and pays the traffic fines that they're there. So this gets to a larger fifth dimension here, which is the quality of life. And at least in the city of Cairo, Egypt, which is a wonderful city, I encourage you to visit it at some point. And it has a great quality of life overall, but the aspects that you have to pay attention to from a driving perspective are really quite interesting. Now, next I'm going to show you a bit of a little snippet. It's about 2 minutes long here of a famous moral dilemma, famous ethical problem here. And the ethical problem, this is produced by the BBC, and they did a great job of it, but it runs through a little scenario here. So I'm going to narrate it out loud as we go along. So let's start.
A runaway train is heading towards 5 workers on a railway line. There's no way of warning them, but you're standing near a lever that operates some points. Switch the points, and the train goes down a spur.
So you get the general picture. It's a British definition, so they're using British language on this, but you're on a control of a switch that can take a trolley that's headed and certain death for the 5 people that are on the tracks, and you can switch the points. So this is the dilemma because, of course...
Trouble is, there's another worker on that bit of track too, but it's 1 fatality instead of 5. Should you do that?
Again, won't take a poll here. It would be interesting. I have noticed over time that I've been teaching this particular problem for many, many years, that people do have different ways of approaching this. Notice there is no correct answer. You cannot say absolutely that you should always switch the points and have 1 worker perish at the opportunity to save 5 in this case. And of course, if you do it with the students, they then say, well, what if one of the 5 was going to create a cure for cancer, or what if the one on the spur is going to create the cure for cancer? These are all questions. And my point here in showing you the trolley problem is that if you have already adopted organizationally one of those or a combination of those frameworks that we just talked about, then the answer becomes a little more clear. Let me proceed.
Many people think the right thing to do would be to switch the points, to sacrifice 1 to save 5, since that produces the best outcome possible. Now imagine the train heading for the work.
So again, a utilitarian perspective might say, hey, you should definitely switch the points, and that loss of one person's life instead of the loss of 5 people's life is always going to be the best outcome. Again, let's just assume that you take that as the actual guidance that you have. So we're going to change the scenarios just slightly here.
Because again, this time it can only be stopped by pushing a very large man off a bridge. His great bulk would stop the train, but he'd die. Should you do that? Most people say no. But why not? Both thought experiments are cases of sacrificing 1 to save 5. What the trolley problem examines is whether moral decisions are simply about outcomes or about the manner in which you achieve them. Some utilitarians argue that the two cases are not importantly different from each other. Both have similar consequences, and consequences are all that really matter. In each case, 1 person dies and 5 are saved, the best option in each harrowing situation. But lots of people say they would switch the points, but they wouldn't push the man off the bridge. Are they simply inconsistent, or are they onto something?
Hopefully none of us will ever be faced in this situation where there is a challenge of this kind in order to face this, but just imagine the ability of the organization to provide smoother operations for everybody if they said, always switch the points, and by extension, always push the man off the bridge. Now, if you knew that in advance, you could decide whether you wanted to go to work for that organization or not. You get a sense for how difficult, how challenging these issues really are. In fact, there's a computer science professor who likes to torture his kids. I use torture in air quotes here, but I'm going to show you 2 more little quick videos that he's done.
Uh-oh, Nicholas. This train is going to crash into these 5 people. Should we move the train to go this way, or should we let it go that way? Which way should the train go?
First, Nicholas picks up the 6th person, puts it on the track with the other 5, and then stereotypically drives the train over all 6 of the people, right? So that's the 2-year-old, right? The sister has a slightly different approach.
Uh-oh, Nora. This train is going to crash into these 5 people. Should we move the train to go this way, or should we let the train go that way? Which way should the train go?
That way.
Nora picks this direction. Truly out-of-the-box thinking here occurs.
Wait, I'm gonna move this right there.
Okay.
And once again, she decides to go this way. Well, you get the picture here. If an organization allowed you to do this, it would be great, but there aren't easy answers in here. However, as data governance professionals, if you provide guidance with this and adopt 1 or more of these 6 ethical lenses in your data governance activities, you will have a better chance of coming up with a fruitful discussion. Once again, it's not the case that we can do the 2 children options there. Again, one of them is clearly less satisfactory than the other. But data scientists are generally not taught anything. Now, I've been teaching in a business school for well over 30 years, and oftentimes my lectures on ethics are the only ones that students get as part of their education. I think that's a shame, and I prefer we could do something about that. But I can assure you that most data scientists are not looking at these issues either, which means you're going to be the ones who are going to introduce them to them. So ethics in general are not the same as feelings. They don't count as religion. It's not the same thing as following the law. It's not following culture norms, and it's definitely not science. But you do end up with things like Google's focus here. This is their statement around how they use AI, and they have a very good set of standards that they statements that they have put up to here to talk about within this. But once again, the question of whether they follow them or not has been raised in the public sphere. We're not going to address it here. Instead, we're going to talk about data ethics as a concept, which is how organizations gather, protect, and use data in their operations. It focuses on these moral obligations about collecting and disseminating information, and evaluates problems related to data in order to formulate and support morally good solutions, evaluating practices with the potential to adversely affect people and society. And the most important part of this is that if you don't consider it, you're probably not even going to think of it. And things will happen, and you don't want to react. You want to do this as a proactive process. So it's the moral obligations for gathering, protecting, and using information and how it affects individuals. We talk here about personally identifiable, but it's really information of all different types that occur in here. There's a number of real world ones. For example, if you use information technology to reduce the size of the workforce, something that's happening with our federal government right now in the United States, using voice recognition software and in fact capturing the voice of somebody and then repurposing it so that you can make a deep fake out of it, monitoring worker activities using the computer, whether it's by video. My car watches me to make sure that my eyes are on the road and that I'm not falling asleep. I consider that generally a help. But on the other hand, you can see there might be some adverse consequences to that as well. Facebook or other social media sites selling your data to advertisers, or maybe better still, to people who are interested in achieving a political outcome. So the basic perspectives there then allow us to look at data governance. And within data governance, we are going to run into situations where some of you may or may not already belong to organizations that have professional codes of conduct. I've got one as an example here on the left. They tend to be promulgated by professional associations. In there, again, DAMA International, I'm the president of DAMA, and everybody who joins DAMA signs a DAMA code of ethics around this. That helps at least society understand that when they hire somebody who is a DAMA International member, they know that they are governed by this code of ethics, and that if there is an issue, there can be the case where we could revoke their DAMA membership in order to do this. There are oftentimes real-world ethical dilemmas, and we'll get to a couple of those in the second half of the program here. But where do we actually end up with it? It's a series of interests that are pitted against another. Certainly, the company wants to maximize productivity of workers, but at the same time does not want to unnecessarily impede in worker activities in a way that's there. Again, my car watching me while I drive is a perfectly fine example of that. But my car, for example, reporting to everybody else in the rest of the world each and every stop that I make, or perhaps each minor traffic infraction that I might commit on a time-to-time basis, might be a bridge too far. I'm also a member of something called the Association of Computing Machinery. And once again, as part of this ethical code, one of my first duties is to avoid harm. These are simple. You can read them over here. I'm not going to read them all the way through for you. As a professional in this association, I have a duty to achieve high quality in both the processes and the products of my work, and to ensure that the public good is a central concern during all professional computing work. So as I said, it's very likely in the near future that some of you bound by codes of ethics are going to be asked to sign employment agreements that may conflict with those codes of ethics. And it will be an interesting discussion and really sort of battle, if you will, to see who's going to win. Will the code of ethics overcome? So in other words, people who say, I'm going to hire you because you're a DAMA member, and I know that you'll behave in a certain ethical manner on this, or is I don't care what you say as a profession. If you want to work here and get this job, you're going to have to sign this agreement, which says you're always going to push the guy off the bridge. Again, could be as basic as that. It's probably not going to be as subtle as that, but nevertheless, it's going to be a challenge. I've written some on this already. There's just an example that you can download at your leisure on there. This gets us to what I love to come back to from time to time, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the idea that we have sociological, physical needs. If we are food, clothing, and shelter needs that are unmet, we're never going to be safe. This is a necessary prerequisite to actually being safe. If we are never safe, we are never going to be able to have what we call love and belonging, being part of something that is larger than ourselves. And if we're never part of something that's larger than ourselves, it's kind of hard to know where we start and everybody else begins. So we have a issue with esteem. Again, feeling good. Finally, the highest place in all of this is to look at this from a self-actualization perspective. These are the 5 levels of Maslow's need. You must first have your food, clothing, and shelter needs met before you can be safe. You can't be safe. If you're not safe, you won't be part of something bigger than yourself. If you're not part of something bigger than yourself, you don't know who you are. And if you don't have self-esteem, you can't work at the self-actualization level. The TED people hijacked this term a couple of years ago, and they call it flow. Flow is a nice term. It doesn't really it describes what you are in, but it doesn't require these things to be present before you get there. And Maslow correctly, I think, identified these necessary but insufficient prerequisites to getting to that state of self-actualization. Well, that pyramid works out really well from a digital civics perspective here as well. And I've written on this in the data literacy book if you have an interest in diving further into it. But when we look at these levels here, there are 2.5 billion people in the world who are connected to the internet with a mobile device of one sort or another. That's the lowest level. In there, they need also then to have a idea that they are not necessarily adults, but a subset of them, 1.5 billion, are adults. Therefore, they have additional roles and responsibilities. Just as adults, we are more responsible than we are as non-adults in there. Then we get to the knowledge workers. There are about 1 billion knowledge workers in the world here. And this is something where I said the effects come into play to the tension that I was describing before. I talk about level 4 as being teachers. They need to have this kind of a level in order to really understand it. And our data profession should really have a level 5 here. So again, just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are necessary but insufficient prerequisites. And if we look at them in whole, we know that the things that are in the lower half here, levels 1 and 2, are out of our control. These are things that we can put societal pressure on people, but we can't force. There's no law that says your child must be literate and ethical in order to use a mobile device connected to the internet. But we can control the ones that are at this top set of levels here. And in particular, all of these levels should be required of data science, information systems professionals, computer scientists, cyber professionals, etc., etc. Now, the reason for this is because most organizations are driven by ROI, and most people think ROI is a really good driver for this, but actually ROI in our world is risk of incarceration. Very big challenge around this. There aren't a lot of people getting locked up for lack of data governance right at the moment, but Citibank has a very public oopsie back in 2020 where they had to pay out of pocket $400 million in cash because of lack of or ineffective data governance and internal controls in this particular area. Now, an obvious answer to your organization is, would you rather pay $400 million to the government or invest $400 million in your data governance process? A set of unintended consequences here, in addition to that, were that the Citibank is required to seek the Office of the Comptroller of the Currencies non-objection before making any acquisitions. That's huge. In other words, mother may I before I can go out and do mergers in that. And that the action is not solely contained in this action from the Comptroller of the Currency. The Federal Reserve Board took separate but related actions against Citibank here as well. So your data governance efforts are the things that are going to keep people from having these kinds of penalties. And I have some friends that are working on this, and I can tell you that here 5 years later, they've made some progress against that. But that's probably not the answer that you want to hear, is that you've made some progress. There are some frameworks for this. Again, I have a little graphic there. I'm not really sure what that was. I think I asked AI to produce one for me, and it kind of came up with that. But again, the framework's pretty straightforward. What are the ethical issues? Could this decision be damaging to someone or unevenly beneficial to certain people? Does it involve choices between alternatives, and are those alternatives good and bad, or perhaps two goods or two bads? Again, is the issue more than about what is actually legal or efficient? And if so, how? These are things that you should work through as part of your data governance efforts when you're dealing with it. Next stage is to get the facts. What are the relevant facts? What are known? What is not known? How do I get more? When do I know enough to make a decision about all of these? What individuals and groups have important stakes? Are these concerns concerning of greater value to some organizations, some parts of the organization, some parts of society than others? And again, all of this, of course, document. What are the options? Have everybody been considered? Have you tried to be creative about coming up with the alternatives? And sometimes the creativity involves asking AI, which is a really very viable option in today's environment. It's not necessarily going to give you the right answer, but it will give you more answers from which you can evaluate, because that's, of course, the next step. Evaluate the options. Which option is best for all of those? Or justice lens. Again, you can see these are the different lenses that you can look through. Those are the 6 that we talked about before in there. If your organization says we will always operate on a care ethics lens, your answer is made. Now, you may be able to point out some challenges associated with taking a narrow approach to data ethics, but nevertheless, it is still at least easier when the answer is given to you in that. Then choose an option and don't implement it, just like we do with everything in life. Prototype it. See what happens to do it. If I was to stand up in front of a group of people and say, hey, I took this option, would I be considered? Would I feel good about the fact that I had done this? I watched a gentleman at one point in time who worked for one of the large companies say, yep, we can figure out whether women are pregnant by what they buy. Well, that may or may not be a great thing that your company wants to have. Now, in this case, it was a case, in this instance, it was a case of the individual not having been given the right type of guidance around this. And while it was a true statement, they probably should not have made that in public. How can I determine that my decision is implemented to the greatest care and attention for all of the concerns of all of the stakeholders? And the answer is probably it can't be. You're going to have some level of satisficing that occurs within there. So what action should I take in order to follow up on all this? Again, good focus here, a very nice framework for doing this. Another tool that I've found extremely helpful in this area is something that the Open Data Group has put together called the Data Ethics Canvas. And you can see here it's 15 sets of questions that deal with data sources, the limitations, sharing, ethical rights, reasons for using communications, positive impacts, negative impacts, minimizing negative impacts, engaging, openness and transparency, implementation on an ongoing basis, and then when it's reviewed, and what are your actions seen as you're looking at this. These are really, really challenging areas, and I found this framework so useful to do this. It's wonderful. This is one of the reasons we get together as a data community, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel in each case on this. Just a great thing when somebody comes up with a decision and you're concerned with it, you can walk through this in about a half an hour, and a good reflection. And again, I say it over and over again, but please document, record. If you're in one of those Zoom meetings where Zoom is keeping track of your, or Teams is keeping track of your conversation, you've got a great set of documentation that occurs with this. It's a really useful tool. It tends to do a pretty good job. Occasionally, you'll have to edit it in order to come back and forth on this, but it documents what your thought process is in order to look at this. So this gives you an idea of some frameworks. Let's now talk about a roadmap on this. And first step on the roadmap is to ensure that data governance, data and ethics literacy are part of your data governance efforts. This doesn't mean just for people on the data governance team, but those that are peripherally involved with the data governance effort, those who you are impacting your business. Supply chain is going to be supply chain folks. If it's personnel, you're going to be dealing with those issues. Again, take a look and see that you have an idea around all of these topics. What you'll see is that you require a foundational decision. It's not that you can educate the entire organization at once unless you happen to have a smallish organization, but that you can come together and start to understand what are the various foundational practices about good data decision. And you can see on the right here, ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is the right thing to do. Or even more simply, we'll say it a little bit later on, it's the difference between can I and should I thinking. And it really does make a very significant difference when you look at how these things are rolled out, because the idea here is that these ethical actions are going to be cross-project in nature. It's not just on this one project, but when you make an ethical decision, you can't have the organization try to tie itself in knots by having one set of ethical constructs for one project and a different conflicting set for another project. So these are going to be things that are going to make a decision. They're going to be seen as precedent. You're seen as setting the direction. Again, it's a roadmap, right? In terms of going out there and looking at these things. All of these concepts come into play: ethics, legality, morality, and by the way, goodness. But they're all also different topics. So when we look at these, technology is going to always evolve faster than we are. Computing power is going to double. Somebody else was saying the other day at the conference that Shannon and I were at last week, I wonder if there's a Moore's law for the power of AI. Well, I'm pretty sure there is, but I'm not sure everybody knows how to measure it just yet. But the idea is that next year, our iPhones or Androids will be faster, cheaper, hopefully better, and maybe less risky. But again, we have some issues with all of that. Again, the storage costs are going to continue to decline. So the ability to maintain all of this information is easier. Again, I love the fact that Zoom and Teams can keep great minutes of meetings and things like that, and then I can ask the AI then to turn around and prepare it into a memo form and send it out to my colleagues. We can all review and agree on what are the pieces that are there, but it also means we're going to be maintaining much more data on people. And if you're in a city, for example, that is taking a particular political stance, and all of a sudden everybody in that city is targeted, or as we've seen at least in the recent week, that the members of the federal judiciary are having lots and lots of pizza sent to their houses. That's a clearly threatening information, and it's pretty hard to stay anonymous in today's society. These networking and advances mean it's easier to make data go faster, better, cheaper on this. And one of the questions that we've had with the whole doging of the federal government is that when they're copying data in there, it makes it much more accessible, much easier to drill down to a specific instance. Again, Mr. Musk said that he found people that were 350 years old. Turned out that was a data technique that the IRS used to actually maintain this. So it wasn't a case that we were actually having that sort of waste, fraud, and abuse. Although, very interestingly, we estimate that the actual waste, fraud, and abuse from foreign actors is close to $750 billion annually. And DOGE does not seem to be focused on those aspects of things. Profiling, again, another very, very concerning practice. You all can find me by simply typing Peter Aiken out on the internet, but that's because I have very little that's interest for anybody to get a hold of. There are people who shouldn't have that kind of accessibility and should not want to do that. And many of them have done terrific jobs of staying off of the internet, but it requires a lot of effort in order to do that. And when you do profile things or profile groups of people, it can be extremely problematic from a society perspective. I love the term NORA, non-obvious relationship awareness. The idea that, again, you put my data out there and combine it with the data for all the professors that are in the world. I'll probably come up with that. And then you do another combination of that and look at the ones that are non-obvious relationships that happen to play musical instruments. And I might come up with that one there. I'm not sure what that would give you in terms of it, other than I occasionally make music and have fun with it. But beyond that, it's there, but there are also just as many insidious combinations that you can go to as well. And mobile device growth, again, tracking of individual cell phones. We're also starting to see a very large increase in the cell phone monitoring as people come in to the country from overseas. There is a legally allowed practice for the Customs Border Patrol people to take a look at your phone on the way in. And if they take a look at your phone and look casually through your phone and see that you have information, for example, that they would consider to be, and again, it's really not much guidelines, but they would consider to be potentially problematic, you can get bumped up to that next level of a forensic search of your device, which again, if you haven't had to go through one of those, it can be a very, very painful and damaging process. Not necessarily that you have anything bad on your phone, but that the implementation of it is done by individuals who are not well trained for the large part, and they are doing silly things like scanning for keyword searches and things like that. And that can be very problematic with it's in the hands of people who are not, in fact, data literate around this. The next part of the roadmap is tell stories about these. Now, if you have stories in your organization, keep those stories in your organization, but still tell them and tell them again and tell them again. I had a wonderful experience last week working with my colleague John Ladley. We both have stories that we've told certain organizations so much that they'll come back with us. And if either of us opens our mouth and starts to tell them again about a story, they'll go, Peter, are you going to tell me the chocolate story again? And that's really where you know you've succeeded. Because once you understand that the metrics of the chocolate story involve not 5 million pounds as in currency, but 5 million pounds as in weight of chocolate, that there's a huge story that's behind that. And that was measured to the point where people were unable to get the chocolate to the people who wanted to buy it during the time when people like to buy lots of chocolate. You can put the rest of the story together from there as well. This was not a compliance or an enforcement activity, but nevertheless it is. You can be sure within Citibank that there are issues that are in there. I'll tell you a quick story on Barclays. Barclays was part of the 2007 crash. They took over a bank that was less well structured than theirs, and they ended up having to buy more assets than they had originally planned because an associate had very poor guidance governance around the use of spreadsheets. So they had taken the spreadsheet and they had said, well, if the things we're not going to buy, we'll hide it. We'll hide the row in the spreadsheet. And they gave it to a junior associate and said, format that so we can show it to the judge tomorrow. And the junior associate formatted it, but in the process, he unhid all the rows. I say it was he, I have no idea who actually got blamed for that one. But when the judge got this piece back and all the rows were unhid and everyone, oh, no, we didn't mean to do that. The judge said, I'm sorry, that's the way it is. You have to do it this way because that is what the law said. So again, very significant efforts in Barclays Bank around spreadsheet usage because they got burned once. Reporting up is the idea that, of course, no matter what happens where you are, you can't simply say, well, somebody advised me to do it. The buck does stop somewhere going up. It also goes down. So again, whether you're bottom up or top down, there are going to be issues around all of this. And finally, we get to the idea of somebody may have told friends and family, or it may impact on friends and family. Now, there's a number of things that will suppress ethical data actions around here. Time, lack of resources, ignorance. Again, ignorance is not that you're a dumb person, it's just you have not had the background in order to do this. Fatigue affects all of us on a regular basis. I certainly make more mistakes at the end of the week after 6 or so plane rides than I do at the beginning of the week, where I'm a little bit pressure. External influences. Come on, Peter. Surely you can let this one slide, right? Let's go all the way to crime. I already mentioned the $700 billion annually that seems to be occurring in the United States around this. There are a whole series of threats. Somebody saying, do this or I will. And again, it's the idea that we have, perhaps family back in another country and that they are susceptible to the local law enforcement that are there. There are poorly planned rewards. Too often we set our reward systems up so that somebody is in fact actually rewarding activity rather than value. Badly planned metrics can be just as bad on this. Again, how many phone calls did you make does not necessarily translate into sales that are there. Ego, big challenge around all of these things. Yes, there's a class of people who are simply bored and have nothing better to do than go out and work on this. And lastly, of course, financial pressures. Just some of the many things that tend to suppress ethical actions. Luckily, a lot of these are things that are also considered illegal, immoral, and fattening, and are looked at by the HR group, but again, needs to go way, way beyond them. Formally incorporating ethical reviews and correction at all phases of your project. So once again, if data governance doesn't do it, it's probably not going to get done. So we need to make sure that we have everybody that's involved looking at what's happening here when we start to discover, look at the intentions. What is it that people are trying to do? And let's test those intentions. Oh, yeah, we're just going to look and see if we can move this plate, connect these two pieces. Again, we'll go for a NOR, a non-obvious relationship that's there. Design phase, are we compliant? Are we making this in a way that's not going to trip up either the organizational values that we've told everybody to do, or if those don't exist, probably at least laws, and maybe we find it easier if we did have those. There's going to be legal components that go into it as well. When we start to test things, the best way to test things is to have a group of people in here who are really good at extreme cases and trying to do things that are crazy, out of the box types of activities. We talk about safeguards that are met. Once again, AI is not a bad place to go to say, what would be some things that would give me very good testing results on this? And try to really push the boundaries of where people look at on these things. So again, safeguards that are developed. And finally, once we've implemented whatever it is we're implementing, there's a monitoring process. Are people doing things in the way in which we do this? It says software development on here. It's not strictly software development. It's any sort of development system that you're looking at on here. When we do end up with corrections, we do end up with something that works or doesn't work well, we want to go back and take a look at how things worked and do it in a non-blaming fashion. The best example I saw of this was a very large retailer that I was doing for at one point, and they had a case where their actual earnings were understated for a number of quarters by about 5%. And the individual who had made the error was actually not fired in this case, although you would think that given a 5% underwriting, and it occurred underreporting for a number of quarters in a row, that would have been a very significant piece. But the investigation showed that the individual did it in guidance with organizational strategy. And so because they were working in strategy, they were exiled to Brazil, I think it was, for 3 years in order to come back. But it was very much of a non-blaming situation. They took it as a teachable moment. Yes. That said, teachable moment has to include the ability for somebody to pull the stop cord, whether you're on the assembly line or on the trolley or whatever it is. You need to have some way for the organization to come in and say, whoa, individual focuses of conduct can guide individual pieces that organizations, while they may have an idea of what they'd like to do, it's the idea that anybody can actually say, whoa, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. Because once people realize that anybody can pull it, they're going to be more likely to do it themselves. Again, just imagine that you have the ability to really call it out, and that it's going to be done in a non-blaming manner. Now, the workplace agreements tend to guide workplace data ethical behavior. That said, some of them aren't very good and they need more guidance. So your organizational data governance group may in fact need to go out and look at creating some of these guidelines in order to do this. If you don't have them put in place like that, it's increasingly likely you will have a conflict, and it's not really a happy consequence in this case. The last thing you want to do in most cases is be out in front of the law, because then you get to spend all the money to get the thing all the way through the court case and find out whether you're right or not. And that's not a place where most people want to go. It's one of the reasons lawyers are by nature conservative around this. When you do encounter good examples of ethical behavior, reward it, especially when it impacts project plans. So many things about our data world are driven by other considerations. My favorite example of this at the moment is Salesforce.com, which has a really nice set of software. But their biggest challenge that they have out there is that people put Salesforce.com in and they move rubbish data into it. Now, it's not really an ethical concern unless you stretch or squint a little bit. And the idea is that you're really hurting Salesforce by putting it full of bad data, garbage in, garbage out. And when you have that sort of a situation occur, it really hurts both the Salesforce reputation. Again, it's something they really want to do. They want to get their software right. They believe in their software. It's good stuff. But if you're putting it up and you're meeting an arbitrary IT deadline that says it's got to be in by, let's just say June 1st, because we're in the month of May here, that's going to be a problem for it. There's probably really good ethical reasons to wait and make sure that the data that's in Salesforce is of at least as good quality as the data outside of Salesforce. And you could make the case that moving it into Salesforce gives you an opportunity to actually increase the quality of it. This talks about impacting organizational resources. Again, just very, very important that you take a look at it from that perspective. So the idea here is celebrate things periodically. What was the best ethical decision made by the organization over the last quarter, or whatever it is that you use to celebrate on these things. And that when the deadlines do slip, as they will, because of course IT deadlines slip all the time, contrast that with the cost of legal or moral consequences that are in there. I know one organization that had part of their data science staff walk because of some very bad decisions that the organization was making, and having those people just have to be re-recruited, much less the fact that they really were probably the best fit for the organization. It's not something that you want to have happen due to an unfortunate set of unforced errors that are involved in that. Finally, of course, the last part of the roadmap is to review and refine and see what's happened. This is how you build your stories. You'll notice from steps 1 to 7 here is, in fact, a very nice set of stories that go onto this. I'll give you a couple more in the way of examples here. We all know about ransomware. It's the actual number 3 big problem area out there where your organization gets hit. Well, in October of 2001, a group released thousands of files that were stolen from a UK jewelry store. Not a good thing. They said, pay us the ransom or we're going to post these files that are out there. And within a couple of weeks, they actually posted an apology. And they said, we found that our sample data was not properly reviewed before uploading. In other words, they said they were going to release the data, and then they found out whose data it was. Turned out it was part of the Saudi royal family, and they were afraid that the Saudi royal family was going to come after them for doing this. So even though you're a criminal, sometimes the bad guys or the worse guys can find you in order to do this. So the question is, would you advise a criminal organization to adopt data governance? This is a great topic to bring up in your data governance group, just as a way of describing what's going on there. What advice would you give them given that? And maybe what wouldn't you tell them, perhaps, right? Second example is crypto, and crypto, of course, everybody's having lots of fun here. There was a gentleman, and it's happening with increasing frequency now, where people are saying, oh my goodness, I'm doing whatever activity I'm doing, and I'm paying for it by having this on the blockchain. Well, it turns out having your data on the blockchain is exactly the opposite of keeping it private. So when you go in front of the judge and say, hey, you can't get me on this, it's fruit from the poison tree, and they say, nope. Turns out there are no constitutional privacy interests in the information on the blockchain, and we've reverse engineered it in a number of ways so that we've been able to go through and we can now pinpoint transactions going into and out of various things. Again, it was originally supposed to be secret, but it turns out to be actually very, very public. Another quick example here again is a contractor who's doing something in here, and one of the reasons you hire contractors is that you can blame them for things when things go wrong. And it turns out somebody finds out down this road that the contractor was not in fact responsible for it, but somebody else was. Should we go and respond to management and say, hey, I know you fired the contractor because they screwed something up, but it wasn't really the contractor, right? Well, again, these are all ethical data issues. And by the way, should you tell the contractor as well? It's nice for them to know that maybe they didn't screw up, although they may have thought that they did. One of the hardest parts around data ethics is the idea of thresholds. When I'm dealing with ethical issues, the first question that I have to get whoever is coming to me with the ethical issue past is, do you know and do you understand and do you want this to be a formal issue, or are you just vetting? And I know that sounds very trite, but people do really have a challenge when they're looking at this. If nobody's willing to submit the formal issue and they're just wanting to complain about it, probably nothing is going to happen. So reduce the barriers in this area and encourage the right kind of issues, because there's lots and lots of gurus out there that say X, Y, and Z. When do you know to call BS? Again, one of the things that John Ladley and I came to conclusion independently for, but we both realized it last week, was all methodologies turn into plan, do, check, act. Well, that's pretty interesting in there. Do you want to die death by 1,000 cuts, or have somebody actually grow a pair in this? And what can you do to put a climate of behavior in place? And the easiest thing to do is to show it's happened to other people before and that the consequences have been generally positive for the organization and not harmful for the organization individual that actually brought it out. A societal harm context: what if the data you're doing is being used to process social harm, like you're influencing people by selling them advertising on the basis of pushing news stories about aliens and things like this, right? Well, these are problems. You've obtained data and doing consent in order to do this. What do you do with all of these things? All of these examples are just types of things that you can turn into stories in your organization so that you can look at this. We have lots of them that have occurred. You can look these up. Presenting with pneumonia and asthma in an emergency department was considered to be not a big deal by one AI because it didn't understand that an emergency room physician would look at those two conditions and slap the person into the intensive care unit, but it wasn't again obvious in there that if you're putting out a recognition system that cannot see certain people, there's an algorithm that goes through the justice system called Compass. Again, if you have that in your locality, it is not proven to have any kind of good results. Here's my favorite example with all of this. Those of you that are Tesla drivers, I'm not picking on Tesla per se, but the artificial intelligence that I want you to watch on the screen here is trying to figure out what's in front. Is it a pickup truck and a person walking? Is it a truck? Is it we're getting closer here, so you can see it's actually a horse and buggy with people that are in here. And wait a minute, it's a pickup truck. Now it's a semi truck, and all of a sudden the semi truck is facing us, and oh my goodness, what's actually going on here? Well, what should have happened is that the software in this case should have had a category of other, and yet we don't put this out there from an ethical perspective and say you must in fact have other as a possible category, because that would indicate caution given all of these kinds of activities. So we've spent about an hour talking about ethics in data governance. And again, I hope that you get the idea that there's an awful lot of things that are going into this data governance context here that have to do with ethics. There's some wonderful books that are out there. Again, Kathy Reich's Weapons of Mass Destruction is a great place to start. Or if you have a Netflix subscription, Coded Bias is out there. If you don't have access to Netflix, I'm pretty much can assure you that every university in the country and every library in the country has a copy of Coded Bias around there in order to look at these things. These are really important issues that we're just now starting to get a hold of. So when we look at all of this is that you can't really package up ethics as being a binary activity. Not right or wrong. It's not one of these systems. It's not always push off the big guy from the bridge. It's not always flip the switch, but we do have to have something in there that allows us to start thinking about these, because you don't want to think about them when it's an emergency. They occur daily. ethics minutes are not a bad way to start working about it at the beginning of your data governance meeting so that you can build, in fact, a framework, a foundation for having these types of activities and understanding how to use them in your organization. And with that, we're getting back up to the top of the hour and get to the part of the show that Shannon and I really enjoy quite a bit, which is talking to you about your questions. Hopefully you'll be with us next month when we're going to talk about effective data governance on this, and we'll jump in for Shannon back at the top of the hour here. Shannon, how are you?
Amazing, Peter. Thank you so much for another great presentation. Always fun to do these with you. Great topic. And just a reminder, to answer the most commonly asked questions, I will send a follow-up email to all registrants by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides, the recording, and anything else happening requested throughout the presentation here in Q&A. So with that, Peter, diving in.
Guessing yes, right?
Peter, do you agree that risk management?
You're ahead of me.
Sorry. Should I pause?
No. I was. Go right ahead.
Shall I? Okay, so diving in here, Peter. Do you agree that risk management and data governance go hand in hand? And if so, do they have different roles with ethics? Maybe they have complementary roles.
They can be complementary. They can also be conflicting, but they're definitely different. So risk management is the idea that within an organization, some aspect of what you're doing incorporates an element of risk, and that the organization has a duty to minimize that risk either to itself, to its people, or to society around that. That's not the same thing as ethics. And again, you may decide, for example, that to reduce risk, you need to put an unnecessary burden of ethics risk on organizations. It's kind of a again, trying to mix two things that aren't really the same thing. That said, there are some great sources of risk management. And in fact, I'll recommend a book by a guy named Douglas Hubbard, who has written what I consider to be the best book on risk management, which is called The Failure of Risk Management. And he takes a really excellent approach, a very skeptical approach to way in which risk management is performed at less than robust means in most organizations. So he's not saying that risk management as a profession is a failure, but that the way most organizations have tended to practice it has not resulted in the types of outcomes people would like to have. So again, it's The Failure of Risk Management by Douglas Hubbard. As I said before, the real great places to look from ethical perspectives is more of a style of thinking that goes into that. And again, I go back to the book here on Kathy Reich's book, Weapons of Math Destruction is a great place to look. Or, as I said, this Coded Bias on the Netflix piece. You'll find that they are different. They're not incompatible, but they're not necessarily complementary. I'll say one more thing, Shan, too. That is that most organizations will have a higher degree of maturity around risk management than they will necessarily around data ethics.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Peter, an organization has so many different tracks of documentation that lead code of conduct, policy standards and procedures, data governance charters, etc. It is becoming overwhelming, and more is just more. What are some of the best practices in harmonizing this metadata?
Wow, what a great question. And I wish I had a slide here that I could prepare for you to put in here, but I'm going to ask you to imagine something instead. Or if you're on your computers, navigate over to something called notebooklm.google.com. It's a free service, one of the AI extensions that Google is offering here. And just give you a bit of context here, because I empathize with the question. As a professor at VCU for more than 30 years, and even if I was only here for the first year, I am still expected to be thoroughly familiar with 261 different university policies. Now, I hope you all agree that's an impossibility, because if not, I got more studying I got to go back and do. But what we did is we took all of this as a coping behavior and loaded all 261 of them into the Notebook LM tool, and I can now ask a query. So when a student comes to me and says, "Hey, Peter, I want to leave class in the middle of your test because it's Ramadan and I'm allowed to do so," I can look up very quickly in the university policies and procedures and see that, in fact, no, the only way that you can have a religious excusal from class is if you've declared that class at the 2 weeks at the beginning of the semester. So in other words, if you don't plan for it and let everybody notify about it, there's no way that you get an excuse. My point being, we absolutely are being inundated with way too many policies and procedures and things that we have to figure out, but that we can use these tools to start helping us understand guidance-wise what's going on within the interaction of them. And it's a way in which AI has been extremely helpful to me and many others, looking at these types of dilemmas and seeing how, in fact, they are helpful to us, how they can complement, and how sometimes they do, in fact, conflict. So one of the things, of course, we did with this was ask it to show us some policies that were in conflict, and we took that back to the lawyers and showed them how to use this. And I'm pretty sure we're going to get some revisions to those policies over time as the lawyers learn how to use these new tools and techniques that are out there. Really good question, though.
Great question, and indeed a great use case of AI. Peter, during the framework process, how long should this take, and would it require an OCM to assist the process to ensure the best path is followed?
I'm going to have to ask what an OCM is. Shannon, any idea?
I'm guessing it's an operational change manager, but I would.
Management could be. You
Yeah.
can Google it real quick in order to do that. So, real good question. In other words, it's one more thing we're asking.
Oh, Carrie, she says it is. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah. So when you look at something like this, it's yet one more thing we have to do. On the other hand, from a data governance perspective, again, if you haven't seen the articles that are out there by Laura Madsen and some of the others that say data governance is not working in its present context because it's too much focused on meetings and not actually the results of the meetings, which I think is a very shorthand way of describing Laura's reasonably articulate challenge to this. Yes, this is an aspect here that will require something in your organization to have a policy to produce. Again, you're welcome to take this one here. It's as good as any for a starting place. But once you've put it into that type of a context where it's recognized by the organization, it becomes much easier then for everybody to say, oh, so you can't just make up your mind and Shannon, give me an answer for this by 10 minutes after noon, which it is 3 minutes from now in your time, right? Not going to happen. That you have a policy in place that says, we do need to sit down and think about these things to govern them in order to look at what's happening here. There's an awful lot of decisions that are people expect you to make in a snap fashion. If you can show that a reasonable process to take you through them will require some reflection and some time to do this. I'll give you a small example on this, but it's I think illustrative of the concept. In the university community, we're always being challenged to deliver more with less. And we have, again, for some reason, we still don't teach classes in the summertime because apparently the students go back and work in the fields, right? That hasn't happened for at least 100 years, but nevertheless, we haven't managed to make summer school the same as fall and spring in the semester system. Quarter system is a little bit easier. They're doing a little bit better with that. University challenges are problematic. So we've taken those summer classes and we've said, let's teach a database course in 7 weeks instead of 15. We can barely make that work. And then we tried to teach it in 3 weeks. And it's just not enough time for people to get comfortable with the concepts. So this idea that there should be a documented process, a recognized process in the organization to go through and figure out how this needs to be approached says, first of all, that you can't expect decisions to be made on Snap. By the way, it's 3:08. It's 8 minutes after noon, Shannon. So you've got less than 2 minutes now to make a decision that we've got you on the hook for. It's just not going to work. And that there is a process to say, hey, we need to go through and consider it from these at least 7 steps in order to do it. Or if you decided to adopt another one, perfectly good. I'm pretty sure that in 2 minutes you couldn't go through all of the steps that are here on the data ethics campus, right? So yes, absolutely making sure that somebody recognizes somewhere that you're going to be doing this type of work, and it does take a little bit of time and effort.
Well, I do appreciate you, Peter, converting to my time zone in but I agree, I could not make it.
And I couldn't either, believe me.
So much like project managers have Gantt charts to assist, what do the data managers have to assist them?
Wow, great question. I don't know that we've got enough out there to do that. I would certainly say that something along these lines, would be useful. Again, just looking at the respective phases of development. Again, I mentioned before, this is not necessarily required to be in the software development perspective, but just have these documents that you use so that when somebody does bring something into play, you can say, hey, let's put it on our process. Let's work our way through it and get from, discovery phase to deployment phase in order to do this. But yeah, that's probably an area that we could use some more work on. Maybe one of you all will come up with a content for this and submit it to one of Shannon's upcoming conferences, and we can all evaluate it in there. But I'm drawing a blank, but I'm pretty sure somebody's done something in that area.
I love the idea. I don't know either. I think it's something that we should, I agree that we should look at. Peter, so we've got some time, lots of time, so keep the questions coming into the Q&A there. Ethics is not a very sales pitch to the executives, especially on the road to establish the initial data governance foundation, which a lot of companies are struggling with. Is ethics a right angle to quote unquote sell data governance, or should it come out at a later point once foundation is established and business case for data governance is in place and proven?
It's a really good question. And I think we've always said that data governance is a bespoke activity for an organization. What works from a data governance perspective from organization A generally is not pick up, transfer, cookie cutter, move it over to the next organization B, because there are so much dependent on these people and process activities, which adds up to organizational culture. But that said, anytime I'm introducing data governance to an organization, I always give them these 2 slides because organizations are concerned about return on investment. And that's true whether you're in the public sector, whether you're working for the government, whether you're working for a nonprofit, or whether you're working for a private company that's all about making money in here. But the other slide, of course, is there is a risk of things going badly. And in many organizations, there are lots and lots of, I gave you 6 examples earlier, where these things did not work out for organizations, and that people end up, with fines, incarceration, good old Citibank here, right? They hate this particular example, but nevertheless, if you're a Citibank shareholder, you paid an awful lot of money because they failed to follow just what would consider to be routine general guidance at this point in time. Great question.
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions coming in here, Peter. So this seems very progressive. So how can you tell if a company has formal data program in place? And if there is none, where does a company start?
Again, great question. We're actually doing, this is again a piece of research that John Ladley and I are working on right at the moment, where we're going through the official 1K filings for organizations that are filed into something called the Edgar database. So there's a public company, you submit this public documentation, and we're trying to figure out what organizations have been saying about data. And it turns out that our preliminary results are showing that they're not saying much that's articulate. Occasionally, you'll see the word data-driven or the phrase, that we are making data-informed decision-making and things like that. But there seems to be very little to back this up. And so the words are in themselves problematic. We're glad that they're using the word data that's in there, but we're not sure that they're actually seeing the kinds of things that are happening as a result from this. So we don't really have a good indication. I'm pretty sure, for example, that at some point in the future, just as organizations are required to have generally accepted accounting practices or principles that they follow. In fact, an organization must declare, if they're a public organization, whether or not they are using them. And it turns out, maybe to your surprise, that 80% of organizations follow generally accepted accounting principles. The 20% that don't then have to justify why they are not doing this. And now I'm using this to say that at some point, I think we will have generally accepted data management practices that organizations need to follow. In fact, if you are part of the US federal government, there's a law that says you must follow, quote, best data practices. Now, I'm not sure anybody's going to get prosecuted for not following best data practices, or that you can objectively point to what are, in fact, best data practices. However, I will tell you that within the federal government, when that question came up, people looked around and said, well, that we're going to say the DIMBOK is what are best data practices. Now, just to be very clear and without going too far down a rabbit hole, the DIMBOK specifies what needs to be done. It does not specify how to do it. And so saying that that's really best data practices may be a stretch, but at least if you are following things, the guidance that is in the DIMBOK, that would be one way of doing it. And maybe what will happen is that organizations, as they're required to declare whether or not they're following generally accepted accounting practices, they may also be eventually required to say whether or not they're following generally accepted data practices. That said, however, if you're interested in a specific company, one of the things I've been urging my students to do is to go and look at the programs for organizations such as the conference that Shannon just held. And again, you can go to the website that's there, and you will see that there are a number of people who put their affiliations down. You can go over to the website, Enterprise Data World 2025, and look down and see organizations, and they will tell you what types of things they're doing in their abstract. So it's actually kind of easy to find good examples, but I always tell people, while we managed to attract hundreds of people who were willing to come and share their stories and to learn collectively around this, the majority of the world does not do this. Otherwise, Shannon, you would have one hell of a conference on your hands in order to do this. And so it is, again, easier to tell when organizations are doing it well. Just because you're not at Shannon's conference doesn't mean you're not doing it well, but I can pretty much guarantee you that people don't come to Shannon's conference and say, we really suck, right? It's just not part of the process. They usually are saying, hey, I created a new tool, a new mapping tool for how to use, where we are in the data governance roadmap around ethics, to the tool that we were just talking about in the last question. That's there. And I'm pretty sure we'll at least have one of you on here that will propose that as a topic for next time through. So a little bit of help around that, but no, there's no formal check the box, and we can't sort things into one category and others. But like I said, if you're participating in an event that Shannon's associated with, you're probably paying attention to the right stuff.
Well, I appreciate that on many levels.
Yeah.
DATAVERSITY events, I should clarify. Data.
Absolutely. But it's true, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we love case studies and we love new things. So Peter, ethics is top of mind for me lately. I have two questions. So one, can you recommend articles or books with helpful information about establishing a data governance ethics framework? And two, where does this ethics work sit? Our governance framework has a data governance steering committee and a data governance task group. We also have data governance roles, trustees, stewards, and custodians. The task group, populated by custodians and end users, is where the real work gets done. Hierarchy would say that an ethics framework should live at the executive level, trustees, but they are the people who are the least knowledgeable about the data.
What a great question and a really astute observation. That said, you've just answered your question. If you have people up at the top that do not understand these topics, you're going to have real trouble getting time and resources to put in and address them. So take your literacy efforts in your organization and focus them on those trustee levels and make sure that they understand what they're signing up for. Again, I'll give you an example from that's perhaps a little bit easier to relate to, but you'll generally hear, sorry about the pun, you will routinely hear that there's no very many dumb generals in the U.S. military, right? Everybody that I've met that's a general officer, and most people have met, is somebody who has gotten there by proving themselves time and again in order to do it. In fact, there's a saying that a general with an unblemished record is a coward, and you don't see cowards at that level in the organization. That also translates over into your C-suite. These are people who have worked their way up, who have fought their way up in some instances against perhaps odds. And we had a really inspiring closing keynote last week of somebody who had fought against odds coming up, being told on that that they were not suitable, and they had simply said, I certainly can make myself suitable. The idea here is, yes, if they've gotten to that level, they're probably willing to engage with you a conversation about responsibilities. And that's really where we're talking about it. Now, this first part of your question is harder. What sort of articles and things can you go for? Once again, I hate to keep coming back to it, but the one question that happens when I show this to organizations, when I show them coded bias, is that they say, do you think my boss has seen this? And I say, I have no idea, but why don't you go ask them and engage them in a conversation around it? It really is 85 minutes of time that they will spend doing really good work. And I would not, advise going into the boardroom and saying, hey, we're going to show you guys a movie for 85 minutes. Instead, I would secure a commitment from them so that they will all watch it sometime offline and then get together for a 1 hour discussion of it after they've all watched the same materials. Oftentimes you hire consultants to do that, and it doesn't have to be the case. There's no value a consultant's bringing into that particular piece. You can have a very informed discussion about this. By the way, Kathy O'Neill, the author of Weapons of Mass Destruction, appears in a cameo in the role of coded bias. So you're kind of getting both of those pieces in one work. I do find that the work that the academics have done in this area tends to be a little bit theoretical in nature, and that we need to have an area of applied ethics that would be developed in order to do this. Many times the academics are arguing about how many angels can dance on a head of a pin, and while that's an interesting discussion, it doesn't actually help us move forward on this. Pretty sure that within the next couple of years, we'll have at least a couple of academic journals that'll be focusing on data ethics as a topic that's out there. But I really wish I could offer you more. Maybe some of our others on the call here can drop some things into the chat here. And Shannon, if you see any of those, call them out and or drop them in. We'll drop them in the PDF that we send everybody at the end of the event here. Wish I had more.
Perfect. Well, we've got about 8 minutes left, plenty of time for a couple more questions here, Peter. What is the role played by culture and AI data governance ethics globally, or it stops at organizations policy?
I think one of my big takeaways from the event last week, and I hate to keep coming back to it, but it's top of mind, so I'm thinking about it, is that there really is no such thing as AI ethics. That AI ethics is data ethics, and it really is absolutely indistinguishable trying to separate them out. It's like having somebody try to separate managing their information from their data. That used to be a question that we would get a lot back in the old days. Data ethics is AI ethics. Data is the input into this, and there are only about 14 algorithms that are useful in AI in order to look at this. And so it's just not, I don't want to say it's not complicated, it's a hugely complicated area, but from a framework perspective, it's just not that complicated. So I see the idea of having a separate governance for AI as being completely missing the point. Data is used in organizations, and how your data is used, AI is one major use of data. It's not the only use, and that all of it should be treated at the data governance level rather than at the AI data governance level. I heard at least 3 different presentations on that. I came away convinced of it. Maybe the discussion's not over yet, but at least that's where I'm coming down on that part of the discussion. Again, really great question, though.
So many good questions. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. So, Peter, would data ethics take in consideration regulations like EFC, European Framework Convention for data centers to help reduce data storage and prioritize data deletion and minimization?
And contrast that with lawyers who say you must retain it for 7 years or whatever the result is. Yeah, really, really good question. And interestingly, the number one technology issue bugging CEOs worldwide today is the size of their cloud bill. So that actually works out pretty well when you consider that most of these data farms out there are storing tons and tons of data that falls into the category of data rot. Now, data rot is an acronym that stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And if organizations would do a better job of managing their data in general, it would be easier to apply ethics to, and it would also result in a significant decrease in their cloud storage bill and their data storage in general. So it's a great cascading question that said if we manage our data better, we can figure out what stuff we need to have and how long we have to keep it in place. But if we don't do that at all, we end up doing what everybody typically does, which is forklift the data onto the cloud and let Amazon pay the bill. And boy, is that an expensive proposition, not just from your corporate perspective, but also, as the questioner noted, from a societal perspective. Do we, in fact, need to have all that stuff as data storage, or could we replace some of that data storage with some computational facilities and make the footprint of AI less from a green perspective as well? Really, really good observation.
Indeed. So 4 minutes. We got one more question here. So how do you drive change in data governance, including ethics, from the bottom up? It's really hard to get executives to believe in something that they think is very low chance to happen to them, never will happen to us. It's not that bad. And we had a little bit of the version of this earlier, but we get this question a lot, Peter.
So it is very much the case that nobody thinks they're ever going to get robbed or ransomed or anything else. But when you look at the statistics, and again, I think it was your second day keynote, was it Eric who did the one that you couldn't see, Shannon? That was he did such a great job of describing how likely these things are to occur. So again, it's too late to say go back and watch that keynote because it already occurred, but there are some good statistics out there that say that large numbers of companies are in fact getting hit with ransomware. And it's not the big companies that are getting hit because they kind of know how to defend themselves. It's the medium-sized companies that aren't terribly sophisticated, the way, again, a government or a very large organization is able to address these types of topics that are in there. So this is where stories help. And again, I said at the very beginning, start telling stories. Again, John and I can walk into certain organizations and we'll start talking about something and they'll say, oh gosh, Peter, are you going to tell us the chocolate story again? When they do that, we know we've succeeded because the chocolate story has become part of their culture. Culture is the biggest impediment to changing thinking about this. And so changing it from the bottom up requires everybody to be thinking about it. If you've ever worked for a company that pays attention to safety and starts off every meeting with a safety minute, you know that they understand this, and it does make a difference. We have seen very good statistical evidence that this results in it. So data minutes are a great thing to look at it, data ethics minutes, data stories, whatever it is, but have it start to occur at all parts of the organization. And when the executives say we haven't got time for that, again, you can't, somebody says, give me a data minute. You can't go, right? You've got to have a bunch of them waiting to go so that you can tell it. By the way, it's tell it, but don't tell it in public, right? Don't let everybody else know what's going wrong, but show them internally that these are things that are happening, that they're affecting their departments, their responsibilities, their key measures and metrics. And that's the way to get things moving.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. And I see, hey, Katrina, she posted a link to an article we have on the website. And you mentioned so many times the conference keynotes, and actually, if you get a subscription to the DATAVERSITY Essential a subscription, the training center, you can have access to all those conference keynote talks.
They were so worthwhile this time. Again, sometimes
So, I know.
they come up, but I just came away blown away. Really, really amazing people.
Yeah, and you were the moderator for the closing keynote. It was so good. Yeah.
Now that job's easy. You just have somebody who tells a great story, right? Chandra was wonderful.
Yeah, and if you upgrade, you can have access to Katrina's data ethics learning plan too. It's amazing, and we'll talk about her stuff coming up. But Peter, thank you so much. A pleasure as always. I really appreciate it. It was so much fun seeing you last week. Like I said, it was a rare opportunity to see you a full week, and glad that we had the chance to meet up and hang out, and for all those who are also in attendance.
Great to see everybody. And Shannon, if you'll put that link to the thing, not just in the link there, but if you send it to me, I'll make sure it gets into the end of this presentation here so that everybody else can share it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our attendees for this webinar, for being so engaged in everything we do, but that is all the time. So just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email to this webinar by end of day Thursday with links to the slides, the recording, and all the additional fun stuff that has been promoted and asked for. Thanks, y'all. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. You bet. Take care.